Hello, I'm Doran Ellen Beldotan in Sfaten, Israel. I'm delighted to see a renewed interest in David Bohm's work. The information that I'd like to give over herein, I tried to get people interested in when I found David Bohm's work. At that time there was no receptivity to it, but it looks now like the time might have come to give this information over. Like the people who made the new documentary about David Bohm, I'm giving this over completely freely too. I neither want nor have the time for any teaching assignments, book deals, speaking gigs. My work is so demanding that I just don't have the time for any of that. So what I give over now, if it's of use to you, that's fine. I want nothing in return. I have 3 of David Bohm's books, and David Bohm is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh in many ways. I would like to explain that the implicate order of which he speaks is demonstrably true. It can be proven. I'm going to give those proofs over herein. And most important about David Bohm's work was not the fact that he was brilliant, but that he was moral, and that he wanted the very, very best for humanity and for all of the creation. And that is what made David Bohm so very great. He was a beautiful soul, in addition to being a genius intellectually. He was a genius morally, and that's far more important. It's far more important for being able to comprehend rather than apprehend, in the sense of trying to shackle and manacle reality. In fact, mathematics is derivative of morality. I'm going to prove that herein. And those who would wish to understand the nature of reality better would do well to work on themselves as hard as they can to improve morally, because without that we cannot understand anything. As we are on the moral continuum, so the continuum of the different interpretations of reality present themselves to us. So you can't think your way out of the level that you're on. You have to grow out of it morally, and then from a higher perspective, a moral perspective, we can see more comprehensive levels of what reality is. Although I'm going to be speaking about the Hebrew language, which is the superset of which classical mathematics is a subset, I'm making this video in English so that it will be available to those who are not Hebrew speakers. I'm sure that those who are studying David Bohm's work here in Israel are fluent in English, so we can all enjoy it. But we're going to be speaking about the particular characteristics and the particular structure of the Hebrew language, which makes it a far better tool for one who wishes to understand what reality is, and what perception is, and what consciousness is, and what awareness is, what phenomena are, than is classical mathematics. The Hebrew language is alphanumeric. That is to say that all of the letters have values. Notice that I'm not saying quantities, I'm saying values. And I'm using that word very, very, very specifically because the Hebrew word arachim, which is translated as values, are principally that. They are moral values. The abstraction of moral values for numerical quantities was a categorical mistake that prevented the mind from being able to not only understand reality, but willfully create it. In Hebrew, there is no such thing as reading without computing or computing without reading. The letters are numbers, that is values. The values are letters. All of the names of the values are made up of letters which themselves have values, and so forth and so on. In other words, when we perceive, what we are doing is engineering reality in accordance with our particular moral level at a given time. All wave phenomena going from very low to very high are derivative of and physical expressions of the moral continuum, which is the substrate of all of the different worlds, of all of the different interpretations of reality. If we wish to create a high level, high value, high quality reality, we have to work on ourselves to constantly be improving ourselves morally, and Torah makes this very, very clear. The attempt to simply figure out or think one's way into understanding is essentially wrong. The Hebrew word kriyat, which means reading, kriyath, more properly, is the English word create. Kriyath is also to call in, to call. So when we read, we are calling creation into being. And as I said, all of the letters in Hebrew have values. They are fecund with values. And we build our worlds in accordance with the quality of our moral level at any given time, which of course is dynamic and can always go up and it can always go down. We're always one action away or one word away from either going up or going down. And every time we make a moral decision about how we're going to speak, how we're going to act, we have effectively cut off infinite possibilities for the one that's going to express itself immediately with that higher level of morality or lower level of morality, which is going to result from our last moral decision. So we see that in original Hebrew, reading and computing are one and the same. And obviously what that does is integrate the faculties of our two hemispheres. So the analytical part of us and the creative part of us are working together, always in tandem, and informing one another. When we read in Hebrew, we take the values of the letters and the combinations of letters, the words, the phrases, the sentences, the paragraphs, the chapters, the books into consideration. Unlike in classical math, the Hebrew letters have more than one value. Hebrew is uniquely structured so that the first letter, Aleph, is assigned a value of 1, and then when we go through all of the letters, and 5 of the letters also have final forms. So from Aleph until Tav, we get from 1 to 400. First we count the units, then we count the tens, then we count the hundreds. Tav will be 400. Kaf Sofit will be 500. Mem Sofit is 600. Nun Sofit is 700. Pei Sofit is 800. Sadi Sofit is 900. And then we go back to Aleph, which is 1,000. And the Hebrew word for 1,000 is Aleph. Clearly, Aleph is both 1, and the very name of it tells us that it's also 1,000. And this is extremely important because it gives us a lot more leeway. We are now in a much more elastic reality once we have letters that have more than one value. Whether or not I relate to any given Aleph as 1 or 1,000 is my personal choice. This is where free will comes in. I always have that choice. Now, since Aleph is both 1 and 1,000, the next letter, Bet, would be 2. And because it's Aleph plus Aleph, it's either 2 and 1,001 and or 2,000. So the letter Bet now has the values of 2, 1,001, and 2,000 because it's Aleph plus Aleph. And here's where it gets interesting. Going back to the Aleph now. Because Aleph is a Bet minus an Aleph, I can choose freely whether to assign the value of 2, 1,001, or 2,000 to that Bet, and the values of 1 or 1,000 to that Aleph. So if I decide that I want to subtract the Aleph as a 1,000 from a Bet, and I assign the value of 2 to that Bet, and I ignore the 1,001 and 2,000 for the time being, what I then have is an Aleph which is equal to negative 998. So now we see, and this goes on, this continues, this doesn't stop. In other words, the letters have infinite substitution values already because they have values, but it turns out that they have more than one value. And the very same letter now, which is 1 and 1,000, we have also demonstrated can be understood as minus 998 as well. Imagine what this does for geometry. Imagine what this does for time. Starting to see it? Because Aleph is 1 and 1,000, it is also, in addition to 1, 1,000 and minus 998, 1,999. if I add that 1 onto the 999, I get the value of 1,000. So the value in Hebrew 999 is like 0. There are many, many, many substitution values for this value 999, one of which happens to be Shem, Cham, and Yefet, Noach's sons. There are many more. Please look in the description below, because seeing these things visually helps. The value 999 is, interestingly, the sum of the values of all of the letters from Aleph to Tzadi Sofit in their simplest value. So if I take Aleph as 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and add all the ones up together until Tet, and to that I add all of the tens values, which is from Yud until Tzadi, and to that I add up all of the hundreds, which is from Kuf to Tzadi Sofit. I will get a value of 4,995. Now, since 4 and 4,000 would be the same, I can choose to look at that value 4,995 as 995 plus 4, and that gives me the value 999, which we have seen functions as a 0 when added to any other value, but in and of itself has a number of substitution values, some of which are very high and holy. So now we see that there is a number which is functioning as 0, but is a number, 999, that is contained in every other value. So it's in every letter, every combination of letters, every word, every phrase, every sentence, and so on and so forth. And so now we see how the all can be contained within the all. All of the letters contain this value of 999, that and more. If I write out the names of the letters, and when I write a final form of any given letter, I always intend for it to be the final value. So if I write Aleph, Aleph Lamed Pei Sofit, I intend for it to equal 831. When I intend for a letter to have the regular value, not the final form, I will write the regular letter even at the end of a word, so it's very clear that that's what I mean. But when I write out the names of the letters, with the ending letters in the names of the letters that have them, like Mem, like Nun, like Aleph, like Kaf, and so forth and so on, Kuf, there are more, I mean for the final forms to be taken into account. When we write out those names of all of the letters, the value comes out as 11,039. If I add the 11 to the 39, because 11,000 is the same as 11, right? Because 1 and 1,000 are the same. 39 and 11 is 50. 50 is the value of the letter Nun. The letter Nun is equal in value to the word Kol, Kaf Lamed, which means everything. Nun is also very often a dagesh chazak, which is one of the diacritical points in Hebrew grammar. It is also equal to the phrase haya yihyeh, which means was, will be. It is equal to me, which means the waters of, or mi, which means who, or damo, which means his blood. It is also equal to adama, which means soil. Soil. Listen now, the word soil is also soul, and also Sol, the sun. It's all one and the same. So the Hebrew language is a far more comprehensive system for mathematics, which in and of itself tells us that all of the letters together is everything. Kol is everything. And when we add up the values of all of the letters, not the names of the letters, but the letters themselves, we get this mysterious value 999, which can be added into anything without changing its value. Yet it of itself has very important substitution values, some of which I'll show you below, and you'll see that it's also very fecund with meaning. So the Hebrew language itself teaches us that reading and computations, when we say computations, in Hebrew we would say lasot cheshbon. Now this cheshbon, which it's interesting in and of itself, because that word also is used for when we take a reckoning. It's really a reckoning of our own midot, our own attributes, which is interesting too, because the Hebrew word midot, which means to take an accounting of our, to account for our characteristics, our modes of behavior, is also our dimensions. Midot is also dimensions, and it's also the characteristics of a person. So the Hebrew language is so structured when it's used correctly that it not only is in accord with what the mystics in every tradition have said, but it proves that they're correct. In other traditions, we have to go on the word of the mystic alone. I had such and such an experience, I had such and such an awareness, I had such and such an understanding, and we are wont to believe, because we see that the person is sincere, that they are giving us an honest account of what it was they experienced, but they can't prove it to us. And that is the difference between Hebrew and every other language, because the structure of the Hebrew itself proves this, proves these things. So when you have a language in which the names of all of the letters add up to the word kol, which is everything, and that the letters themselves add up to this value of 999, which doesn't change anything when it's added into something, and yet in and of itself it has very, very high holy meanings. And when we see that the language is structured such that this letter Aleph starts the Aleph Bet with a value of 1, but it also becomes 1000, and that isn't arbitrary, because its name Aleph tells us that it's Aleph, that it's also 1000. These things are demonstrably true. So what's happening is David Bohm's implicate order is always present and as a result of our moral standing, we choose which of the substitution values to assign to the letters of that which we are experiencing. But if we go up morally, if we choose to look at the good, to look at peace, to will for peace, we also go up in how we're able to explain things and experience things and change the nature of reality too. As I say, once we realize that these letters have more than one value, and some of those values are also negative values, that does all kinds of things with the computations, including the computations of time. I hope that this discussion has interested you, and if you're a person who's dedicated to peace, and you look into these things, you'll find that it begins to reveal itself to you, and you begin to see it for yourselves. One of the things that I do, that I demonstrate on my blogs, on my Facebook page, in my videos, is I take a term in Hebrew which is normally understood as having a negative definition or connotation, and show that that same value can be changed to be understood differently. For instance, I can take a word like mavet, which is normally translated as death, but it's equal to 446. So I can choose, instead of seeing it as death, to see it as ha'emet, which means the truth. And so once I see that, I am no longer subject to death in the same way, because I have understood death differently. And this is what's so important about the Hebrew language. When we begin to do these substitution values, and we begin to do them with as a result of a practice with some alacrity, we can do it very fast, and we can move from one reality into another. Even one substitution value that we see clearly can be a peg upon which we can engineer a world which is a substitution value for the world that we were experiencing, but that which is equivalent to it. It's equivalent to it mathematically, because we're using substitution values, but it is not equal to it. It's equivalent to it. It's not equal to it because it's on a different moral level. And so in accordance with our moral growth, we also gain more and more mastery over how to understand that which we perceive, and eventually we come to learn how to perceive realities at will. Thank you for listening.